take on all things happening from the perspective of two parents of BIPOC transgender kids.
I gotta say, I am so gassed for our guest today.
Stephen, I'm so excited. Today we're going to be speaking to trans activist and all-around badass Landon Richie.
Oh, what the hell are we waiting for? Welcome everyone once again to the Parent Advocate Podcast. Let's get started. Lizette, can you believe we are in our third season of the podcast? And even though we took like all of January off to get our batteries recharged, this year is starting off like gangbusters. All the things are happening. So before we even get into all of the fuckery, I need to know, what the hell have you been up to?
Stephen, it's been crazy. My brain is fried in so many ways. What have I been up to? I've been freaking the fuck out. Can I say that? That's what I've been up to.
You can.
I've been running parent group. We're in legislative session, full swing. I'm really angry because we won the birth certificate lawsuit, only to have the House file a bill that would ban any amendment to your birth certificate. We have another expansive medical care ban happening on the floor, and we're dealing with Trump's executive orders. I'm trying to keep my kid okay. So if I had to give Daniel a song that was the embodiment of his personality, I would say it was Nat King Cole's Smile. I don't know. I can't hear to not cry, but I know that he just always takes on the day with a smile on his face, even if it's complex inside, right? So the other night, he got up at like 1 a.m. and got in the shower. And Jose and I were like, what are you doing? Like, why are you showering? And he's like, what do you mean? I'm getting ready for school. And we were like, no, it's 1 a.m. And he was like, oh my God, I thought it was time for school. And it's just been like a week of disrupted sleep. You know what I mean? His anxiety is like showing itself in how he's not sleeping or confused on time. And it's a lot for our families to hold. And so me as a compartmentalizer, I've been helping families and doing that work. So that keeps me sane, but it's a lot. And, you know, this is coming off of having gone to creating change and it being such a like recharge. It's scary times, but I feel hopeful even in the midst of the scariness, because there's parents like you and so many other parents that are like, we're going to fight this. So that's my ramble. Let me hear about you. What's going on with you? Tell me.
All right, first and foremost, you got to give Daniel a big Uncle Stephen hug. Wrap him in these big black arms to let him know he's going to be fine, because I think a good hug never hurt anybody.
I will.
What have I been up to? So last weekend, I had the best time at the Human Rights Campaign Foundation's Greater NYC dinner. I was a guest of one of the dinner chairs, which was really cool because I was up front. I was hobnobbing with the goober smoochers, as they say. I was serenaded by David Archuleta, which was super cool. We had to endure Chuck Schumer speaking, and we're not going to get into that. But overall, it was a great night. And I'm now a person who walks the step and repeat, the little press junket. And so I walk down and get picture taken and people ask me questions. And that's really cool because it's just really cool. So that was nice, getting the little pamper treatment. Last week, I was at a press event with Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman. Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman is the Congresswoman for District 12, where I reside. We were at the Bayard Rustin Center for Social Justice in Princeton, where they talked about the House Resolution 52, recognizing and honoring the work of community organizations and individuals who create and maintain services and educational programs for marginalized groups, ensuring the resilience and prosperity of members of the LGBTQIA+ community. I know that's a long name for a resolution, but it was introduced on the House floor by Representative Bonnie Watson Coleman, and it's an important thing to do because there are organizations who are and continue to be critical supports for members of our community, and they're in the fight just as much as you and I are. And so it's really important that this resolution has been entered to at least recognize some of those efforts. On Wednesday of this week, I attended the 50 States rally against Project 2025 at the State House in Trenton. I was one of, I'm going to say, 350, 400 people that gathered in the cold on Wednesday to basically fight against the coup, because, you know, that's essentially what's happening. We want to stop the coup. There were signs about Trump being a clown, putting Trump in jail, impeaching him for a third time, sending Elon Musk to Mars. That was my favorite. Send Musk to Mars was the favorite sign that I saw. They had the Trump big orange baby balloons with him with the rattler in his mouth and in diapers with his swollen body. There was just all kinds of memes about our joke of a president. And I was just so happy that even in the midst of all of this just difficult circumstance we find ourselves in, people are stepping up, fighting back, shouting out, not just allowing these things to go on unchecked. But Lisette, we can talk about all the things that we haven't been doing, or we can get to today's topics.
Let's do it, Stephen. All right, Stephen, let's get into this. Since taking office, Trump has signed a flurry of executive orders attacking trans healthcare, military service people, and trans participation in sports. Trump's executive orders are stripping trans people, especially youth, of life-saving healthcare, ignoring medical experts, and violating basic rights. In a repeat of his first time in office, he's going after trans troops and their families. Trump is reviving the trans military ban and cutting healthcare for trans service people and their families, turning his back on those who serve. And Trump is trying to erase trans athletes. His sports bans aren't about fairness. They're about erasing trans people from public life and fueling discrimination.
Lisa, I can't even. I can't even with these executive orders. And the problem for me with most of them is that they are just nonsense. They're just gobbledygook words thrown together without meaning, without enforcement mechanisms. And more importantly, they're not the law. They're not even policy. They're just the ramblings of a mentally deranged individual. And it's causing a lot of chaos and disruption in so many people's lives that I just can't with it. So, in other fuckery, Target's decision to scale back its diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives has ignited a backlash from both civil rights groups and their investors. Advocacy organizations have called for a national boycott, arguing that the company is caving to right-wing pressure and abandoning its commitment to marginalized communities. Meanwhile, investors have filed a class action lawsuit claiming Target misled them about the financial risks associated with its DEI policies, particularly after the company faced conservative backlash over its Pride merchandise last year. Well, in 2023. The situation highlights the growing tension between corporations and maintaining social responsibility and appeasing their shareholders, all while navigating politically charged debates over inclusion and equity.
I don't know, Stephen. We're a household of three, and those Costco buys, it's going to last me like a year if I go buy at Costco, but that's what I'm doing.
I watched this video, Lisette, that had me cracking up. Well, I watched two videos. The first video was a person who was just walking down the long line of just shopping cart after shopping cart of return materials. It was just great. And the second was even better. It was a brother who went on a crazy shopping spree. He had like all these carts that he had rung up. The bill came to like $21,000. It was insane. And then he was just like, I didn't get good customer service and y'all reversed your DEI policies. So I don't want none of this stuff. You can put it all back. And he walked out.
I love that.
Target fucked up and now they're finding out.
I mean, for real. Okay, this one made me a little bit happy. 15 Democratic state attorney generals are suing the Trump administration over an executive order that has led multiple hospitals and medical centers to suspend gender-affirming care for transgender patients. The AGs argue that no federal law bans this type of care and that Trump's unilateral action is both unconstitutional and unlawful. They emphasize that denying medically necessary treatment not only harms trans youth, but also directly contradicts established medical consensus. With hospitals facing legal uncertainty and trans patients left in limbo, these state leaders are fighting to uphold their own laws, protecting access to gender-affirming care, and are prepared to challenge the administration in court.
Listen, the other day I saw the New York Attorney General, Letitia James, at a press conference where she said, hospitals in New York, if you deny services to your patients pursuant to this executive order, we will sue you. We will sue you. So don't you dare stop providing care because this orange Cheeto head has said that it's against the law. It is not against the law. What's against the law is discriminating against patients in New York based on this executive order. So this is really, really encouraging.
Stephen, I want to say something to our listeners. For years, parents in red states have been saying that the bills that we've been fighting against were part of a larger federal plan. And nobody believed us. Project 2025, people were like, that's not going to happen. And I just need people to recognize and acknowledge acknowledge that every executive order is based on bills that have been filed in red states. And so if you are afraid now, I just want to be that bitch that says you should have been fighting with us. You should have been speaking out, because we might not be here had we all just said, stop with this. Stop it. There's no safe state when there's federal bans, and there's just nowhere to go if these executive orders were to go into effect. And we should have been banding together and pushing back from the beginning. And so that's my soapbox rant that I just needed to put out there.
I would have said file this under petty, but it's not. It's facts. It's absolute facts, because we've said this before. If they come for one of us, they're coming for all of us. And your failure to stand up when they come for one of us have left you in this unenviable position of now they're taking away rights that you didn't even know that could be taken away. Like all these people who are not getting their WIC checks. You know what I mean? It's like, what did you think was going to happen when the social services were stripped away? When he's looking for budget cuts and Doge is looking for budget cuts, do you think they're going to take them from rich people? They're going to take them from all of you.
And also to all the parents that were like, Lizette, just move. Hello? It wouldn't have fucking mattered if I moved, right? Like, we are facing these executive orders now, federal executive orders, which are unlawful, yes, but they're creating chaos and people are losing care in the bluest of states.
One of the things that Kelly Robinson said at the HRC dinner was that chaos is the point. Chaos is the point. When we're screaming about our care being eliminated and inability to, see doctors, and our kids not being able to go to hospitals and all of these things, no one is paying attention to the fact that these billionaires have their hands in the Treasury Department's coffers and are stripping our resources from us day by day. Like, sure, a judge may have stopped Elon Musk today, but who knows what he already got in the week that he had access to all that information. Anywho, let's talk about Karla Sofia Gascon, the first openly transgender actress nominated for a Best Actress award for Emelia Perez, who is now facing backlash after her past racist and Islamophobic posts resurfaced. The offensive posts dating from 2019 to 2021 have led Netflix and the film's producers to distance themselves from Gascon. Despite issuing apologies, she's been removed from promotional activities and will not attend upcoming award ceremonies. Unfortunately, this controversy has overshadowed the film's achievements and sparked discussion about accountability in the entertainment industry.
Stephen. This shit pissed me off. It made me mad. It is what we talk about all the time. I get it. She's Latina, blah, blah, blah. But like, when we are not intersectional, when we do not see that our well-being is tied to Black trans liberation, then we are failing everyone. And we too are being bigoted, right? And so, fine, she apologized. She cried. That's lovely. And this is a reminder for white trans folk, white passing Latina folk, to get it the fuck together. I know I'm like cursing a lot, but like, I'm just mad. Like, I'm frustrated. And I'm like, y'all, what is wrong with you that you have to be this hateful?
Listen, I'm going to say this first. This is not a PG show. We cuss. Get used to it. Second, I was pissed when I saw this. I was pissed for so many reasons. The first and foremost is this is the trans woman. This is another marginalized member of the marginalized community speaking ill of other members of marginalized communities. Like, how do you rationalize that? Like, I don't know how you form your lips to say anything racist, anything Islamophobic, anything xenophobic, recognizing that you're not outside of this, you're inside of this bubble of targeted marginalized communities. So where do you get off?
But this is where I get mad with the term Hispanic, because really I should be correcting myself because I couldn't remember where she was from. But she's not Latina. She's Hispana. She's from Spain. And there has been a long history of anti-Blackness and Islamophobia in that country. And so I think that this is one of those moments when we as communities need to be clear in the language we're using, right? Like, me calling her Latina, most people would then think, oh, must be from these countries or whatever. And I think that this is, all racism is wrong. All Islamophobia is wrong. And I also think that this is where we have to have those discussions with how members of our white trans community impact and harm larger parts of the movement. And so I was just as pissed as you were. I liked the movie. Look, it had its flaws, right? But I was like, damn, they went down in flames. Like it was like a good gangster movie, right? Like where you're like, yeah, like it had action, it had death. But this shit is not okay.
It's not okay.
And we're not watching it.
And tears aren't enough.
No.
Tears aren't
No.
enough. You can't just get called out for something bad that you did. Don't take full accountability. That's the part for me. The failure to take full accountability. Yeah, I said those things. Those things were wrong. I should have never said those things. I'm going to hold myself to a higher standard. I hope that I can make amends for the people that I've offended. And I do not want people to feel bad for me because I did this and I am the one who should be making amends to those communities. Period. No feel bad for me. No, oh, how can people be like this? No, you did that. And so you should own it and you should be accountable for the things that you've done.
And also, like Zoe Saldana did blackface in the Nina Simone film. I mean, that's fucked up too.
Yes, it is.
This gets into the deeper conversations around like racism in movies, all the things, we just got to be better fucking people.
It's true, but we have got to get to our guest.
Let's do it.
Landon Richie is a proud transgender and gay youth advocate with a passion for political engagement and social justice. A lifelong Texan, community organizer, and policy expert dedicated to expanding and protecting trans and LGBTQIA rights, Landon has been at the forefront of advocacy efforts in Texas, helping shape the modern wave of trans rights activism nationwide. Landon's journey began in middle school as a volunteer for the Houston Equal Rights Ordinance campaign, where he developed a passion for grassroots organizing, which led him to push for non-discrimination protections in his own school district, laying the groundwork for lasting cross-campus coalition building. Landon's impact extends across Texas through his policy and organizing work at the state legislature, where he has played a pivotal role in empowering trans Texans, especially trans youth, to advocate for themselves and their communities. A recent graduate of the University of Houston with a degree in political science, Landon now serves as the policy coordinator for the Transgender Education Network of Texas, also known as TENT. His work is deeply informed by the legacy of trailblazers like Monica Roberts and Cecilia Gentili, whose brilliance, labor, and sacrifices continue to inspire his commitment to justice and equity. Everyone, please welcome Landon Richie to our show.
Welcome to our podcast. We're so excited to have you on to share your story, insights, and advocacy.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited to be here.
So let's get started at the beginning. What first inspired you to get involved in activism and advocacy for the LGBTQ plus community? Was there a particular moment or experience that sparked your passion for fighting for change?
Yeah, so my story is not unlike a lot of trans folks, but I certainly grew up and sort of found myself in a position to become an advocate in a different way than a lot of folks. I think I came out when I was trans at 11 years old. I wrote an email to my mom because I couldn't bear, telling her in person. And that had been sort of ruminating for a year and a half, where I knew that I was trans, like I had a word for it. I understood who I was versus like the past 11 years of my life, knowing that there was something setting me apart from my peers, but not having any way to really articulate it. And so when I came out, family was really supportive, and I am always and continually grateful for that support and unconditional love that they showed me. And that allowed me and sort of gave me permission to feel comfortable and safe sharing my story and using my voice. We started going to PFLAG meetings as a family pretty shortly after I came out. And at one of the meetings, there were different groups that would come and present on various topics before breaking out into small support groups. And one of those groups came to talk about the Houston Equal Rights Campaign Ordinance, or the Houston Equal Rights Ordinance Campaign. There we go, or HERO. And that was an effort to add to the city non-discrimination code protections for 16 plus classes of people, including folks on the basis of gender identity and gender expression, sexual orientation. And so I sort of got involved in that local level advocacy, was a volunteer with the campaign, was doing door knocking and trying to get people to support increasing protections for all Houstonians, but especially in my case, trans and queer Houstonians. And so that was sort of how I got involved. I was 12, I turned 13 during that campaign. I was at at the Montrose Center for one of the big launch days on my birthday. So it was like very much a part of my life. And around that same time as well, I started going to the Capitol, got involved with like LGBTQ plus advocacy days. And with my parents, obviously, we would talk to our representatives and try to talk to our senator, who was not and still is not supportive, but just sharing, our family story, my story, how they as folks in power would be able to support us, support me, make sure that other people like myself who couldn't be there in person were also supported and protected by the state. And as I started getting more involved in community, as my family and I began going to meetings and community events, we just sort of got involved in advocacy that way.
The last time I saw you was in DC outside of the Supreme Court when Chase Strangio was in front of the Supreme Court arguing for the Scrimeti case. And we were talking about just the impact and the import of that moment. And I was completely surprised to see you. I didn't expect to see you. I talked to your father like maybe a month prior about perhaps having you on the show. So it was really just encouraging to see you there. And I'm curious to know, like, what continues to inspire you to be politically active? Like, where do you think that activism comes from? And what do you think other youth should know about political engagement and activism, especially at this really critical juncture that we are in as a country?
Yeah, that's a big question. I actually wasn't planning on being at the Supreme Court that day. I had no real steps to make it to DC, but I happened to be in town for a separate work conference and was like, I'm not going to go to these sessions today. I would, rather be at the Supreme Court with my community as, we are showing up for one another in this really pivotal moment, like you said. I continue to be involved and stay, engaged and active within advocacy and politics in a sort of like more policy way, because it is such a personal thing for me and for the people in my life who I love and care for. And I've always sort of felt that way, given the position I am in with the safety and security that a lot of folks don't have. Being able to then use that privilege to uplift the voices and stories of folks who are not able to be in those rooms, to have their voices and their stories heard for any number of reasons. And especially being in Texas, we have been facing these attacks for many, many years. I mean, going back to 2015, when the narrative about non-discrimination protections for the HERO campaign turned into this on a larger, more uplifted stage than back in 2015 or even 2016 with North Carolina and the bathroom ban. And so I feel that it is my duty to continue doing what I can to fight for my community, fight for trans youth of whom I used to be, right? Without the access to the healthcare I was lucky and able to receive as a minor, and still receive and am lucky to receive today. Without that, I likely would not even have made it to 18, where a lot of these states, including Texas, that is the reality they're forcing youth into. And so, that's really what drives me to continue showing up and doing this work, even though it is exhausting and tiring and really hard, especially now. But I draw inspiration and strength from our Trancestors who navigated a life in a world where these legal protections that we have gained and won in relatively recent years were a dream for them, and they still managed to exist and to thrive and to build community, to exist as themselves and fight for the recognition that they deserved, that we all deserve. And so even in the face of losing these protections and these recognitions, knowing that we were not any less legitimate or valid or did not exist in the absence of these recognitions, the same is true. We will not cease to exist because an administration or a law or a policy wants people to think that we don't. And so it's this continual engagement in sort of dreaming and hope that there is and will be a future that we can all see where we are secure and safe and have access to necessities, and not just healthcare, but also housing and education and access to food and anything that a person needs to live a healthy, happy, and full life. And I don't remember the second part of that question, and I sort of went on a tangent, but
I think it's really important that you talk about that policy piece, because I often describe Arizona as like the quiet older sister who experiments to see if mom and dad notice. And then Texas and Florida are like, oh, mom and dad didn't notice, and so we're going to go hard, right? Like we've always been that test state for really bad policy. And then if it doesn't work, Florida and Texas are still like, let's try it anyway. And so it's like this awful kind of trio that we have lived through the last decade or more. There's also something you touched on this, like I had to have a talk with my mom because she was like future thinking with my kid and stressing him out a little bit. And I was like, you have to understand that today, like the word transgender was scrubbed from the internet, like from all government agency websites. And while you're thinking that's just like a word scrubbed from a website, the real lived impact is that trans people are no longer legally recognized by the United States government under this new administration. And so you're right, like trans people exist, they've always existed. And yet to see the progress and then see it stripped away was jarring. It was terrifying for a lot of us. And we know that one of our heroes, because he's one of mine too, is Harvey Milk, who really pushed against assimilationist ideas and told people not to be afraid and talked about proximity being the way forward, right? That people who loved you wouldn't vote against you if they knew you would be harmed. I'm wondering, in this day when we know that that's not necessarily true, there are parents who voted for Trump. There's a parent actively in my parent community who I know voted for Trump and now is panicking about everything that's going to happen to his trans daughter and already happening, right? What are you reflecting on when you're thinking about those who paved the way? What are you pulling from their work to inform strategies we need to take? And while we don't need to go in depth in those strategies in this moment, like, what do you think are key right now for us to do?
When we reflect on the work and the labor that our Trancestors put in, it was all done without any real support from the government. There might have been a sort of air of like, we're going to let you do this and not interfere, but very rarely was there any stepping in, be it funds or what have you, like we're seeing and have seen in recent years with support from government entities. And I think because of that reality, much of and really all of the community organizing and building and community care that had to happen was based in community. It wasn't a reliance on what the government could give you or what recognition or anything like that. It was people's needs are not being met. And so how do we meet those needs? And so I'm really lucky to be in a lot of conversations, intergenerational conversations with movement leaders and folks who have been existing as themselves engaged in this work across this shift that we have seen, the progress, the rollbacks, including this one. And what they keep coming back to, and what we all keep coming back to, is how are we doing that deep canvassing and deep organizing where we are meeting people where they're at, not talking in the like ally sense of helping somebody come to a realization that the bare minimum trans people exist, right? It's more like, how are we reaching the trans and queer folks who are in rural areas? How are we reaching the trans and queer folks who are not in supportive families? So have maybe like limited internet access or limited access to the outside world beyond that bubble of control and oppression. And that is not like always going to be possible. And there are myriad obstacles to making sure the people who need to be reached are reached. But it's about that constant sort of striving to make sure everybody is touched at some point, and we know who we can go to, who we can refer people to, who is the person to know if you are needing access to X, Y, or Z, or if you need just like a supportive person, if you need a roof over your head, like who are those people that we can then make sure folks get connected to? And I think that's going to be a lot of what the next 4 years for sure, potentially even longer, and not wanting to, sort of exist within this framework of 444, because it doesn't just end when a new administration comes in. That is going to be the path forward, is making sure we are as connected with our community and with these networks locally, regionally, statewide, nationally as we possibly can. Because what's happening federally now is what's been happening in red states for a very, very long time. And folks with more state protections have not necessarily been forced to prepare for what is now happening federally. And so tapping into those resources across state lines, that knowledge and that learning and that experience, and how community can defend and prepare, is also going to be really, really critical.
I'm really happy that you've touched upon the changing state of affairs now that the challenges have elevated from like a state by state type of thing with 26 states with active anti-trans laws on their books to now potentially a federal ban on care and a federal elimination, even just through these micro things that they've done so far, scrubbing websites, of eliminating coverage, of banning trans people in the military, of all of these little micro things that they're doing that are having macro effects across the country. It's very easy for folks to be disheartened or dismayed or feel like burnout is like all that there is left. And I can imagine, as someone who's been in this space since 12 years old, you started actively fighting back against the fuckery. I can only imagine that, like many activists who've been on the front lines, that you've encountered challenges. And I'm really curious, as we enter this next phase of even more fuckery, like, what are you doing to address the challenges that you've encountered and stay buoyed and prepared for this next round of whatever the fuck we're going to be seeing?
Yeah, I think I'm still figuring that out for myself. It's a constant reminder and practice to, like, knowing that the work is going to be there tomorrow, so stepping away for a little bit. It's not closing your computer, is not abandoning the work. It's an act of care for yourself and ensuring that you can get back up tomorrow and do it again. I think back to the 80s and the AIDS crisis, where people were going to funerals in the mornings, protests in the afternoons, and then the clubs and partying at night. And I think that's obviously a very simplified version of what people's realities were, but it highlights, the need and the importance of course, being with community throughout all of this, and be it in the club where a lot of folks will end up, or just a group of friends, or book clubs, knitting circles, getting together at a park and like painting something, right? Being in community, doing something that brings you joy and a sense of contentment, finding those moments and the things that allow you to exist as a human, not as a human in opposition to the state. Because we are still here, alive. We still have lives to live and should live to the fullest. At the end of the day, that's what we are fighting for people to have. And so if we are denying that for ourselves, it's hard to then imagine and hope for and dream of a future where that is the reality and people don't have to fight for that reality. And it's hard. Like, I have to remind myself every single day, like, this is going to be here tomorrow. The situation is going to be the same. It might be even worse. But right now, sitting at my desk, staring at my screen, not having had water in like 6 hours or food in 3, like, I have to make sure that I am going to be here for the long haul, because it's said all the time, this is a marathon, not a sprint. So we have to pace ourselves to the extent that we can. Obviously, some circumstances and situations are going to demand more than others, but like in the interim, while we are able to stay grounded and do things in moderation and make sure that we have a life outside of this is paramount, and what I try and don't always succeed in reminding myself of.
The one thing that I always remind Daniel of, and he adores you, PTW, is that youth lead the way all the time. Young people are the most effective at sharing their stories and experiences. What advice that you would give young people right now who are feeling the overwhelm, right? Maybe are in homes where they're not supported, but wanting to engage, wanting to empower themselves?
I It's so difficult because there's so many things I would want to say, and obviously words can only do so much. And I think first and foremost, and wanting to convey and people to youth especially to really internalize, is you are perfect the way you are, regardless of what the government or federal or state or local, regardless of what the people in your life are saying and making it seem to be true. That does not negate who you are, firstly, but it also doesn't negate how incredibly special and worth it you are. It's really easy to read what's going on and be bombarded with all of this news. Even if you know at your heart of hearts that is not true, it's really hard to not fall into believing that it might be. I've certainly been there when I was younger, especially. And it took a really, really long time for me to combat that and get to a place where I can be sure of who I am in the face of all of this. That is primary, is knowing that who you are is who you were meant to be, and that there is a world of support and care and love out there for you. People who are engaged in this work, in making sure that that is a world that you feel and eventually get to live in, people are dedicating their lives to that so that you can just exist freely as who you are. And there is no engagement too small, I want to say. People think that advocacy looks like testifying in front of a Senate committee, and that it can, but that's not like all that there is. Some of the most powerful advocacy is just interpersonal, having those hard conversations with people, or even just existing as yourself and giving the world an alternative narrative of what transness, what queerness is. And if that looks like you riding your bike on a Sunday afternoon, that's what transness is, right? And so if that like just existing is a revolutionary act, you don't have to bleed yourself dry and give up all of yourself or in the service of like storytelling or advocacy. There are things that you absolutely should keep for yourself and hold close to yourself that the world is not entitled to. And so whatever you choose or decide to share, be it on smaller platforms, or if you want to engage in larger forms of advocacy, knowing that like you have the autonomy to present whatever you want to present and to hold close whatever else you want to. You don't owe that to anybody.
I love that. And it reminds me of like when we saw each other in DC. Now, Lisa, you got to understand, like I knew who Landon was because I'd seen him before. I'd seen his picture. His dad sent me his picture. Like I knew who he was. I don't think he knew who the hell I was. And so I rolled up on him, big black dude in the middle of DC, and he was just standing by himself. He had like a scarf or a shawl or something on his shoulders. And I turned around and we just started talking, and we were having, from like an outside observer's perspective, a very intense conversation. We were talking about some heavy shit. And there was a young woman who was standing just to the periphery of us who walked up to Landon and was like, "Are you okay? Is everything okay here?" And it was like the most amazing. I'm having goosebumps right now as I'm thinking about remembering that story, because she had nothing but care and concern for him, and she was making sure that he was okay. And again, from the outside looking in, it was like a very intense conversation. And I'm sure someone who didn't know us, who didn't know what was going on, would have been rightfully concerned about what they were observing. And I just have to imagine that moments like those really like reaffirm your belief in humanity. And I'm curious about like what other moments like that have you had that really show you and demonstrate to you that there is hope for optimism, that all is not lost?
Yeah, we are in a legislative session right now in Texas. Things haven't gotten too crazy yet, but they more than likely will. And we'll have some very long, very intense days at the Capitol on hearing days. And while there are so many emotions, so much stress, a lot of tears during those days, and by the end of it, it's, you got there before the sun came up, and you don't leave until after it's gone down, and your feet hurt, and your heart is heavy, and your brain is fried. You cannot think about anything. Somehow people are always managing to smile and laugh And when we have a lot of these really big hearing days where the reason we are there is to, in some cases, beg, in a lot of cases, demand that we be seen as human and be treated with the same protections and respect that we deserve and that everybody else is entitled to and deserving of as well. You know, while there is that aspect, we always also like have people coming up to us or hear from other folks. Like, this is the most trans people that I've ever been around in my entire life. And even though it's a really, really hard day, there's still pockets of joy and just community and existing that we carve out in those spaces because we have to. Last session, at one point, there was a demonstration, there was a die-in, and we ended up leaving from the Capitol inside the halls and going to the outdoor rotunda. And people were chanting, people were waving flags and signs, and I was having to leave. But there was a young kid next to me who, didn't have anything with them. And so I gave them my flag. And I always have like a couple extra flags on me because I end up giving them away. But like their face just lit up because they had something tangible that represented like care and community. And I think those are the moments that I hold on to the most, is just whenever I am able to connect with another trans person and see each other and know that if there is nobody else in the world that sees who I am or cares for me, I got this one person. May never see them again, but like I know that their existence on this earth means that somebody is fighting for me and wants to see me exist as myself. Just those little moments, they look like nothing in passing, but mean the world.
I know it's hard to think like 5-10 years from now in the midst of like ledge session and this administration, but like, what are some dreams you have for yourself that you hope to accomplish in the next 5 to 10 years?
That is really hard, precisely for the reasons that you named. And I don't know if I have really any sort of grand aspirations for the next 5-10 years, but I would like to, like, I don't know, just continue having joy and love and community, whatever that looks like. Of course, would love and hope that in 5-10 years things feel more secure, not just for myself but for everybody. But yeah, I just hope that I'm still engaged in this work to the extent that I can, still making time for like hikes and going to my neighborhood coffee shops and just existing. That's really on the 5-10 year sort of time frame, just to be existing as myself.
That's beautiful. Just want to hug you. Okay, so
I'm still like blown away that y'all had never met until the Scrimetti hearing.
yeah, I like literally, I walked away thinking, oh my God, that is one of the most wonderful people I've ever met. And I don't have that impression of people. You must understand, I'm very jaded about this world. And so like, I was just like, oh my goodness, Aaron has such the sweetest son in the world, just such a good heart. Anyway, I'm not going to keep, stroking you. No one fights these battles alone. Community and support systems are absolutely key. So tell me, what role has your family, your friends, the mentors that you've had played in your journey? And for the parents who are listening to this show, what can they do to better support their LGBTQ plus children? Because I can see the impact of Aaron on you like completely, whether their children have just come out or they're deep into their advocacy work. What can parents do to help?
Yeah, for me, those sort of supports and role models in my life represented and allowed me to sort of see a future of possibility, meeting trans adults for the first time, not just seeing their like transition timelines on YouTube, but actually meeting trans people whose hands I could shake. Like that was huge because I had no tangible representation of what adulthood could look like when I was 11 years old, 12 years old, when I was still figuring myself out. And so seeing not just trans people existing, but living like thriving, happy, healthy lives, that gave me permission to be like, okay, with the support of my family, going down this path, it doesn't feel as scary. And of course, like having my family's support has been incredible and lucky. I'm lucky to have had that support, which is, it should not be a thing of luck. People should just have parents who love and see them and support them. And that is the duty of parents when they bring a child into this world, is to love them unconditionally. And I think, it wasn't easy for my parents, even though they had sort of, suspected that I was trans for a while, had always picked up on my nonconformity as a kid. But still, it was an adjustment. And I had done up to that point 11 years of, soul searching, if you want to call that, figuring out who I was and coming to terms with my reality. And I came out, and my parents at that point then knew. And it wasn't like they had 11 years of that inner turmoil and that thought process and that coming to terms. They were starting from square one when I told them who I was. And that's the position that a lot of parents are in. And it can be very jarring and scary and uncertain. And there's nothing wrong with those feelings. I think that's completely normal. You have an idea of what your kid's life is going to look like, and all of a sudden it's maybe a very different picture. But creating the environment where your kid feels free and able to share their true selves with you, like, that is, the work has already been done. The foundation has been laid, and from there it's just listening to your child. They know themselves. We as trans people know ourselves, and who we are. We don't need medical establishments or governments or adults telling us who we are. And so trusting that going on this journey with your child, with your family, as a family, is going to enrich your lives in so many ways. It will be scary and challenging and difficult, especially now. But I know for myself and my family and a lot of others, the world opens up when you're allowed to be yourself and pursue a life path that is true and authentic and just truly beautiful. A representation of just how expansive and full life can be. So I think holding on to that, even when things are hard, and especially when things are hard, is going to be really essential. But knowing that, like, that support, you'll mess up, people mess up, mistakes are made, but going back to continuing to communicate your support and your care and intention and intent to learn and to grow is going to be really key.
Lizette, you want to ask this final question?
We always give our guests the chance to share a message directly to our listeners. So for the parents, the allies, and young people tuning in, what's one piece of advice or encouragement you'd like to leave with them?
Especially now, I have been going back to this myself, but reminding myself and the people in my life that trans people will outlive transphobia. We have always existed, and a world without us has never existed and never will. And regardless of what happens now or in the next 4 years plus, trans people are going to be here. And we are going to continue building lives and striving towards a world where everybody is free to exist without the constraints of binaries or restrictions on who you can be and how you can show up in the world. That future is something that will happen.
We love you. Thank you so much for joining us on our show today.
I am so glad it finally worked out. I know we've got through a couple of changing meeting times, but I'm really glad we could do this.
I'm glad I got to see you at Creating Change too.
No, I always in passing, and that's how these things always go, but it's so great to just be in the same space with you.
I was supposed to be a Creating Change, but I had a job that I started, and so I couldn't leave. Like, literally, I was just like, damn it. They were calling me to Richmond. I had to go to Richmond for like an on-site. So there was no way I could even like fake it, like go to Creating Change and then go to my meetings in between. There was no faking the funk. I actually had to be on campus. So I missed it this year, but there's always next year.
Always next year. We'll both probably be there as well.
Here. Well, thank you so much. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day, and I'm looking forward to the next time we see each other.
Yeah, likewise.
Thank
Hopefully
you.
not in front of the Supreme Court.
Yeah, not in front of the Supreme Court. Let's make it a destination other than that, and someplace inside, preferably.
That would be nice. Yeah.
Now it's time for our recurring segment, Allies and Assholes, where we highlight individuals or groups that are supporting the LGBTQIA community on the one hand and call out straight up assholes who are trying to move us all backwards on the other. Lisette, who are we talking about today?
Our ally of the week is Washington, D.C.'s Metropolitan African Methodist Episcopal Church. The Metropolitan AME secured a groundbreaking legal victory over the Proud Boys. After the far-right extremist group vandalized the historic Black church in 2020, the church fought back, not just in court, but by seizing control of the Proud Boys trademark. ADC Superior Court ruling granted the church ownership of the name, barring the group from profiting off its brand without the church's permission. By turning a hateful act into a powerful tool for justice. Metropolitan AME has set a precedent for holding white supremacist organizations accountable in unexpected and impactful ways. I would say that this is the most incredible thing that happened last week, and that Frederick Douglass is celebrating from beyond.
Lizette, when I read this, I could not help but laugh. Like, I had to read it and then reread it to understand. I literally had cognitive dissonance. A black church owns the Proud Boys name. I'm going to say that again for the people in the back. A black church owns the Proud Boys name. One of the most horrific contemporary organizations pushing hatred in this country is now owned by a black church. Karma is a bitch.
Yeah. And I must be in my petty era because I almost doubled over. Like, I was like sitting on my couch and literally almost rolled off. Like, it still makes me laugh. Like, I'm like, oh, good for you. I love this shit so hard. I wish I was this brilliant. I would be causing fires everywhere. And this is why DC's Metropolitan AME is our incredible ally of the week.
Congratulations to the Metropolitan AME. Now onto our asshole of the week. Our asshole of the week is hands down Secretary of State Marco Rubio. In one of his first actions as the newly appointed Secretary of State, Marco Rubio set immediately to ingratiate himself with his new boss by immediately suspending passport applications that contain a request for an X gender marker or for a change of gender. In an internal State Department document, Rubio instructs workers to suspend any application requesting an X sex marker, as well as any application where the applicant is seeking to change their sex marker. Citing President Trump's anti-trans executive orders this week, which state that the policy of the United States is that an individual's sex is not changeable, Rubio's order effectively stops the processing of all passport applications of trans and non-binary citizens, many of whom can no longer leave the country. And in Facebook posts after Instagram posts after TikTok video, I have seen evidence of trans, non-binary, and gender expansive people bemoaning their inability to leave the country because not only are their applications being suspended, but their current valid passports are being stripped and seized from them.
You know, Stephen, this moment has been really hard and scary for everyone. I know that for people who aren't in this work, they don't really understand what this means. And I had to have like a come to Mama Carmen, my mom, Mama Carmen's best friend Jesus moment, because Daniel calls Jesus her bestie. She was like, no, everything's fine. I think a lot of people are going to cope in this way of like, it's okay, it's fine. And I had to tell her, when you don't have access to appropriate identity documents that recognize who you are fully, and when the US government website is stripped of any word that recognizes you and your identity as a human being, that of a transgender person, that of somebody who can amend their birth certificate to match who they are, then the government is telling you that they no longer legally recognize you, and therefore you are no longer protected. And that is really critical in this moment. And so what Marco Rubio is doing is letting people know that they are no longer legally recognized by the United States government. And the only silver lining was the one person who did have their passport confiscated was able to get it back, but with an M marker, which is really fucked up. And I just want to tell families out there who are listening to this and are scared and worried, yes, we should be scared and worried, and we should be doing everything we can to stop what's happening.
I got to double click on what you just said, because the issue for the people who find themselves in this situation is a multifaceted one. It is one in which one document or set of documents describes one person, another document or set of documents describes yet another person, and the visual inspection of the person doesn't necessarily make clear to the people looking at these documents who they have in front of them. And so that person is now going to be under suspicion, because now it appears that they're trying to create some sort of fraud or subterfuge, as opposed to the government has prevented me from having documents that align. And so now here we are in this situation where I am now left to the mercy of this individual who is looking at my documents to determine what's going to happen to me. And that is completely unacceptable. And this is why Marco Rubio is our asshole of the week. Well, that's our show for today, folks. I want to thank today's guest, Landon Richie, for joining us today. And of course, I got to give it up to my co-host in the work, Lizette, for just holding it down the way she did.
And thank you, Stephen. I cannot So stay rested, stay hydrated, keep fighting, and thank you for tuning in to the Parent Advocate podcast.
Folks, as usual, please be sure to subscribe to our podcast and YouTube channel, follow us on Instagram and TikTok, and do whatever you got to do to stay up to date with everything going on here at the Parent Advocate podcast. And most importantly, stay safe.
Goodbye.
Bye.